Hello, everybody. Welcome to our CX Leader webinar this month. My name is Anthony Sanchez. I'm from Customers First Now, and today we have our CEO, Carrie Nelson, with us, who will be introducing our very special guest from one of our customers today. Before we get started, I really want to make sure that everybody knows that you can submit your questions to our presenters through using the questions panel on your GoToWebinar control panel. So if you just enter your question there and submit it, we'll get to the questions as soon as we're done with our presentation. With that, we're going to get into the presentation now, and I'll hand it over to Carrie Nelson.
Great, thanks, Anthony, and hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So today's topic, as we've called it, is really this gaining CX buy-in, and so as we think about this, and as I've talked to many of you and others out there leading CX, this is one of the key things that you are all faced with, is how do you get buy-in, both top down, bottoms up. And as I thought about the topic, I invited one of our customers, Liz Bauer, to join us today, and she's an executive at a company called CSG International, and she'll tell you a little bit more about them and who they are. But I think the journey Liz has been on with her team and the executive team has been one where I know so many of you have faced some of these same challenges, and Liz and the team have really done some creative things, but I think more importantly, how Liz has really kind of gauged the organization and the culture to do things at a pace that makes sense for her company. So she's going to tell that story, and I just want to start with a few things around, B2B in general, because we are going to focus on business to business, and then also some of the key challenges as we set up this topic. So with that, one of the things is, we work with our clients, many clients, whether you're even still doing B2C, there's some B2B or through channels or through distributors, you're working with other businesses. And what we see is, and none of these stats will be surprising, I don't think, to anybody, but definitely there is value, whether you look at, the McKinsey data, the Forrester data, having a great experience, even if you're selling to a business, is really important, because at the end of the day, there's a human being at the other end of it who is a consumer, and they have expectations that go beyond, being a representative of a business for your company. And just one little story I'd like to share is when I first started the CX program for a very large B2B company called Dun & Bradstreet back in 2006, I remember when we did our first survey, and we started getting all these comments like, why can't you be more like Google in how we search for data? Why, kept mentioning all these other more consumer-based, experiences. And I remember the leadership team, it was like the first time we all sat there and said, wow, we can't compare ourselves to other, B2B companies in our industry. We actually really have to look at what people are experiencing out there, because the bar is completely different than what we thought it was. So I think that the key here is B2B it can be more challenging, but the expectations are the same as any other company out there in the world. And so when we look at some of the key challenges, and we've all faced these at some level, is, the first one, I call it just connecting the various functions. So whether you're B2B or B2C or both, most things are very cross-functional, and customer experience, it touches, sales and marketing and customer service and finance and legal. And so one of the most challenging things can be is, how do you connect all these functions together so that people agree and align on the experience? Because when you go into something, whether you're building journey maps or whether you're looking at survey data, trying to get to what is the real truth from a customer perspective versus what we each think internally based on the role we play. So that definitely is a challenge. The second one, I see this a lot where people get very excited and want to get, some actions in place, go after that low-hanging fruit. And, that is a good place to start to get people engaged, show momentum. But the key thing there is it can start to kind of wane. And so how do you sustain it and ensure you're programmatically, showing not just here's what we're doing this 12 months, but where do we want to be in 2 years, 3 years? I probably wouldn't go out further than that, the way, the world changes and business changes. But really thinking through how to sustain those actions. And then lastly is really a big one, and it's driving accountability, and not just at the senior level, but across all levels of the business. How do you get people involved and feeling they can make a difference? And this is especially true in B2B as a challenge, because the two B2B companies I worked for over a 25-year period, 80% of the people never talk to a customer in both companies. And so how do you ensure those folks know what they do matters to the customer, and really connecting them? Because it does matter that everyone's involved, not just customer-facing people. And I think that's another one that is an important thing to think about. And Liz will definitely touch on that topic. The key other area, and this is one where Liz and the team have done a really good job, is around governance. So one of the key things to drive around sustainability and actions and focus is to have some sort of governance around your program. And, the 4 key things there I have is ensure it's top-down support. So, who are the key influencers, the key decision makers in your company? Make sure they're part of driving, the focus, not making all the decisions, but ensuring that there is the support, they're removing barriers, they're enabling people to be successful. The second point there is really ensuring that, if you're focusing on a score, a survey score, NPS, CSAT, whatever it is that you're looking at, ensure that there is a linkage to the company goals, because ultimately that's how you'll sustain your program, is making sure people know that you're not just measuring a survey, but the survey is a great indicator of your customers' buying behaviors. The communications are really key, and also just recognition of wins along the way. So, these are just some of the high-level things that we see. If you do this consistently around your governance, it can be, really helpful in this, in sustaining your program. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Liz to give you a real-life example and her experience, and she's right in the middle of all this. So she's going to really take you all through that. So I'll turn it over, Liz, to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Carrie. And along the way, just interrupt me if there's a point or question you want to make. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I think before we get started, it's important for you to understand a little bit about what CSG does, because that will help you understand who our customers are. We basically develop software and technology solutions for cable companies and telcos. We're behind the scenes doing their billing, rating, facilitating the engagement that they have with their customers, whether it's call center technologies, field force automation technologies like the person that comes to your home. We aren't there, the actual people in the call center or driving those trucks. They're using our technology. And the reason that's important is because our sales process is very, very long. And our customers stay with us for a very long time. And that is because we are kind of behind the scenes, the heart and soul of what is absolutely developing their cash flows or their revenues. We are their charging engine. So you would think that based on that, our company would have been doing customer satisfaction surveys for many, many years. Up until last year, we had not done a survey for 10 years. And the reason for that was we had been doing customer satisfaction surveys and no one was doing anything with the data. So decision was made, unless we're going to do something with the data and communicate what we're doing with the data, quit asking. In 2016, they asked me to step in and start looking at some of the programs that we were doing. And our focus as a leadership team was really looking at what are we doing to drive top-line results and bottom-line results in all areas of our company. One of the things that was driving me crazy was the fact that every time our company had a misstep, which think about high volume transaction processing, back office operations, our salespeople on the front line just gave away products and services. That's how they kept customers happy, right? And I had a theory that the Customers First Now folks helped me validate, was that we probably weren't pissing our clients off, pardon the language, at that point all the time. Maybe there were other touch points in that journey that were irritating them. And by the time that we did have a misstep, maybe that was the straw that broke the camel's back. So the reason I got involved with this was really, how do we drive top line and bottom line? Also identifying those important things that our customers tell us versus what we created in our own internal speak, if you will. Carrie talked about her experience where 80% of the employees didn't talk to customers. In our company, many of our employees talk to our customers. That seems like a good thing, except then you may have 1,000 versions of what the customer was thinking. So we had a very difficult time putting that customer voice first. So this process enabled us to constantly go back to data and input from the actual customers versus our own employees' versions of what that meant. That was certainly important. That was additive, but we constantly would go back to the data. Then, kind of jumping down to the bottom, we had just relaunched our brand. And through that, we had done quite a bit of research with the market, with cable and telco companies all around the world, with our employees, to really understand what did CSG do well and what would differentiate us. And the good news about that was it was something in our space that would differentiate us from just being a commodity product. So this probably was the most important slide I ever put together. In order to launch a program like this that was more than a satisfaction survey, keep in mind I run investor relations, marketing, and corporate communications. So I don't own our operations team. I don't own our sales team. I don't own our support and maintenance groups. I am legitimately the definition of what you would call G&A on an income statement, right? I am merely an expense. So I had to go to the executive team and say, we need to get a little bit more disciplined and precise about what we're doing. And everything in our company, because we're a public company, is measured on ROI. So I went back through and looked at all the professional services we had given away in the past year for any misstep we had done, right? Anything we had ever dropped. Not to go outside this group, we had given away $20 million in man hours just because our salespeople, probably the right decision, said, hey, we have to give away, services to keep this customer happy. Probably the right decision, not going to second guess that, but I said, what would happen if we avoided $2 million of just pure write-off? That would translate into 4 cents a share. Again, I have investor relations. What would happen if we could sell $5 million more to our existing customers? I translated that into net income based on our metrics, then translated that again into 4 cents a share. We traded at the time at about a 15 multiple. That would have added 60 cents to our stock price. That's how you get executives' attention. Most executives are compensated with stock. That's how you get an executive team to sign off on however much your program is going to cost. I then went to our 2 most recent wins. Wow and Bright House combined contributed about $25 million in sales to us. So go to the left, that's 5 times, 5 million in net income. That would have been 20 cents a share, $3.20 to our stock price. That's how I got my management team's attention, right? Because I needed to convince them that if we were going to do a satisfaction survey, that we needed to involve people that did not report into me. So I needed the other executives to say, yes, this is a priority. Yes, I'll give you my top lieutenants. And yes, we will build this into their performance objectives. Anything?
Yeah, I think that this is so powerful, and I know so many of you are always looking for like, oh, how do I get to the ROI? How do I get my executives involved? And when I met Liz, like this is what she was building before we even talked about what an approach would even be. Because and what's so interesting, and I think if you capture this, her role had there's no customer in it except marketing, brand.
Yeah.
She had communications, investor relations. But when you think about that combination, it is all about what she just talked about on this slide is like, how do you bring the brand to life? We talk a lot about that at Customers First now. Through your customer's experience, how do you drive your financials? Through your customer experience. I mean, and Liz had this really unique opportunity in her role to bring that together, especially after you just launched the brand.
Yeah.
It just seemed like such a great timing, and your approach was just very clear, like the clearest I've seen, in a long time. And I think that is because this buy-in was so critical in an environment where you said for 10 years, it's like, you're introducing something that hadn't, worked in the past. And so why is it going to work now?
Right. So kind of going off of that, if there was one thing I'd leave you with, this is probably the most important thing I could have done. Moving on to the next slide, we're a process company. If you're Comcast and you're a Fortune 30 company, it's just assumed you're going to send out bills correctly, right? So we are a very process-driven company. As Carrie said, we had just launched our vision and brand internally and externally. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but it was very important to say, where did this fit in the scheme of things? Because in our company, marketing and corporate communications are considered squishy. No offense to any of you guys out there. Again, we like metrics that draw direct lines to how you're driving revenues or reducing costs. That's all that matters in our world, right? How are you? Love to say we care about employees. We do, as long as we can show that a higher engagement score translates into reduced churn. So we measure everything. How many breaths we take in a day. So I needed to be able to say, how does this fit in our scheme of things? And again, I put it in between that value proposition that we were delivering and how we tied it to our people, our process, and our technology, right? I needed to have that linkage because no one on our team reported into me. So, and nor did they have to listen to me. So I needed to somehow get a schematic that would make them feel good about where this fit without making it look like they now reported into me. So moving on to the next one, this was a great session that we did with our executive team that Carrie led that was really important. We needed to understand what that customer experience endpoint looked like and what our design principles were. And actually, our CEO came up with the first one, which is do the ordinary extraordinarily well. Billing is absolutely boring. People take that for granted. But if you send out a bill wrong, that causes our customers all kinds of problems and increased costs.
Well, and just adding, in most journey maps that we build for customers, invoicing is one of the top pain points. And so, I mean, this is what you do for a living.
Yeah.
And so it is just one of those things where it's like getting it right. Like you said, it's just like a table stakes.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So it's so important.
So we involved our executive team in coming up with these design principles because one of the values of our company is be authentic. And we're a Midwest company, so I'll just leave it at that. So we needed it to be in our words, which worked out great. The other perfect timing on this, our clients, cable companies and telcos, the number one thing that their executives are being rated on is NPS scores. So they are going through a massive transformation. You know, when you talk about customer experience, people will always put Netflix above Charter. They will always put YouTube above dealing with their telco or a wireless provider. So they were going through the same transformation. So we needed to, again, take advantage of this opportunity to say, you're changing, we're changing, and how do our design principles align with what we heard through the journey mapping exercise and the input that we received from our clients. So their voice was in this, our voice was in these design principles. Then moving on to the next one, because we're a process-driven company, we needed to lay out clearly where we sat in a one-page, this is how we do things at CSG, a one-page diagram that said, what do we want to accomplish? How are we going to get there? What are the tactics? More important, what are those success metrics? Again, in some cases, we were broken up into a North American business and then an international business. We had no benchmark for the international business. So we use this as our guiding principles for my job in this, and our CEO meets with me monthly to go through how we're doing relative to these various tactics and metrics.
What I love about this, though, it is in one page. I mean, the hardest thing for any, it's easy to write a really long deck. We all know that. Like,
yeah.
You can all write a 100-page deck, and, that's easy. The hardest thing is how do you clearly articulate, again, objectives, like where, why do this, the strategies, and then the tactics. I think this is a great framework for a lot of companies to use to just get to what is the essence of what you're trying to do and be very clear.
Yeah.
And who's the owner? I love that owner is right there and an overall goal. So it's like all the key things on a page. I love this one.
Thanks. Then moving on to the next slide. This is what I call herding the cats. I love the fact that Carrie thinks this is a great governance structure. So, this is the ultimate of herding cats. I'm the leader. We have a communications person that helps me. We have a steering committee. This is my cross-section of our peers on the executive team and a couple of key influencers, the folks that run our professional services group and the folks that run our support group. Then we've broken it out by our clients. We have what we call a pay TV group and really an international group. All of these folks, majority of them report into 2 members on the steering committee. So I need to somehow keep the voice of the customer at the center with a group that have I have no control over what they do. From an accountability standpoint, I have to get buy-in from the steering committee to put performance objectives and people's performance goals to ensure that they're aligned with this. So literally, I have no responsibility but the ultimate of accountability. So this is truly what I would call a political campaign. Think of it as a political campaign. In our company, I had to go and get the buy-in one person at a time. And we did this by facilitating workshops, by bringing in Customers First Now. And I'm not trying to do a pitch for them, but I needed outside experts that actually had implemented this in other places. I had looked at Deloitte, I had looked at BCGI, I had looked at Accenture, and I needed people who actually had done more than just put together frameworks and great slides. Because again, our organization is operators, and they don't respect people with pretty slides that actually haven't felt the pain. So this is a governance structure of a lot of actual doers. The CX champions, we meet once a month. I facilitate the conversation. I make them the voice. I make them report back. We go back to those design principles, and we've identified in each case the 3 that we're focused on. And natural pride, integrity, and good work ethic is what's getting things done, not the fact that we have a formal CX program and that they report into me. It's the fact that I work with really smart people. They get it. With data, they know how to make things happen. Without data, it's everyone's opinion. So it's a fantastic structure if you work with really good people that one of your core values is be, in our case, customer obsessed. And that has been our differentiation in the marketplace. I think it'd be really, really difficult if you didn't have a culture where your customers really mattered, right? So that's our structure, or what I call the herding of the cats. This is what the next slide is, what I report back on to the executives every month. Again, because we have the attention span of ants, we do everything in a one-page document. We say, what have we accomplished? You know, are we green, red, yellow? I will always put almost everything in yellow when it comes to customer experience. Again, because we're not at end of job, next steps and longer term milestones. By communicating with the execs, whether they care to hear it or not, whether this is the most important thing on their list, it gives them confidence that I'm not wasting the company's money, that I'm telling the truth. Sometimes we're doing some good things, sometimes we're not doing good things. And because the majority of the people on the governance committees don't report to me, the people on the executive team that they do report to get involved and have buy-in, because I'm willing to throw myself under the bus and say, hey, I'm not getting it done. Here are the challenges we're having. Here's my outlook and the risks. No one on the executive team, once they know they can add $3.20 to a stock price, wants to see an unhappy customer. And that's how I start off every single presentation to them. I have one slide that shows the stock price, and I typically put plus $3.20. That's not saying everyone's coin operated, but that's the approach I've taken. So moving on to the final slide, you see a theme here. This really is herding cats. My skill is not process and framework, which is ironic in a company that values process and framework. My skill is probably in getting people to align behind a vision and care enough to do something about it. In our case, key influencers are more important than anything because, again, we aren't a formal customer experience organization. So I needed to enlist my partners in operations and customer service and sales, and I found people who this is their passion. Not everyone, this is their passion. So I'm not boiling the ocean. I'm just trying to make a few people highly successful, and that will spread to others. One of the things Carrie and I talk about quite a bit is I went into this guns pulled out, and I was gonna, cure cancer here, and our company couldn't consume the amount of change I wanted to introduce. So rather than dig my heels in, looked at how much we can consume in a way that was productive, efficient, and ensured that those early key influencers could actually execute and be successful. Then probably the most important one for myself is be flexible. Our team is very vocal and sometimes, even though it made absolutely no sense with all the research that I had done, I allowed people to try new things and new ways of getting things done, and it worked. So even though it may not have been a best practice, it worked. So I think that's how we kept our CX champion teams involved. So I think it's really important to be flexible and understand what your company can and can't do well. And finally, there's a lot of children in most companies. Our CX champions, sometimes they act like children, and when they do, I take them aside and let them know that they're acting like children, but for the most part, as long as we all act like adults and treat each other with respect and listen and that flexibility and understand we're all aligned to the same thing, that works out pretty nicely. So with that, I'd turn it over for questions.
Yeah, and just to remind everybody, you can submit your questions through the questions panel on the GoToWebinar control panels, and we'll get to them as soon as we can. I have one question for you. You mentioned that you hadn't done surveys because nobody was doing anything with the data.
Right.
What are you doing with the data now, and are you doing surveys?
Yeah, so we just completed our first survey last October. Next week we launch our second survey. We take the results from that and we align those with the journey maps and identify which of those factors are really those moments of truth, and can we tie what we learned in the survey, what the challenges are, how we're making it hard in our case to do business with us, our operational effectiveness, and also are we adding additional value to our customers. One of the things we learned through the surveys and through our journey mapping exercise that Carrie and Nadine led was we weren't doing a good job of letting our customers understand what our products and solutions, really the capabilities and the breadth and depth that they provide. So yesterday and the day before, I just spent 2 days with one of our user groups. We hadn't done user groups in a long time because, again, we go out and we get our customers' input and then do nothing with it, which makes no sense. Totally realize that. But actually, it's interesting because of the data from the surveys and the journey map, our product and solutions teams are now willing to use user groups and then tie them back to those design principles. How are we demonstrating additional value? Now, we'll take that information from those conferences, and then I'll try to help them translate that into, if you could drive this much more in revenues, what does that translate into from a net income and a EPS standpoint?
So we actually have a question that's kind of related to that and what you talked about already. And the question literally is, I may have missed this, but how did you determine the amounts used in your projected ROI, and how are you measuring this going forward to what your actual ROI is?
Yeah, great question. Actually, that's the most fun. So to pitch it, I used hypothetical numbers. If you don't mind going back to that slide, Anthony. Okay. The $2 million in concessions avoidance, I took 10% of what we had done the year before. That in our company, that probably varies. There were probably years we gave away more and less, but I just used the year before.
And you decided on 10%?
Yeah.
Just as a random number then?
Random number.
An achievable number.
More than achievable. Right. Absolutely. Great point. More than achievable. I looked at the sales to existing customers. I went through and looked at our top 3 largest clients and met with our salespeople to find out how much they had cut the price on certain contracts that we had done, and quite frankly, I took 1%. So very achievable in my eyes. And the reason I only took 1% is procurement. We deal with a lot of procurement people, and their whole goal in life is to keep prices down. And then I didn't quantify the reduced churn. I didn't on this slide, but we lost 2 clients. So I could look at the revenues from those clients and said, had we identified that moment of truth, in our case, it wasn't in the delivery of the product. It was upfront in our sales and servicing of the customer. Had we gotten their input from someone other than the sales and service people, we might have identified a problem way earlier. Keep in mind, our clients typically sign 5-year contracts with us. If we had identified that in year 2 or 3, could we have saved those customers? Now, going forward, what we're doing is very easy. Are we seeing a reduction in write-offs? Are we seeing better price integrity? Can we attribute it all to the customer experience program? Absolutely not, but the leadership team's willing to give us that. The leadership team's willing to say, if you go to the slide on the governance committee, I don't know if your guys' companies work like this, but we are a very silo-oriented company. Everyone's in functional areas, whether that's operations, sales, support, services. So we are very functionally divided or silo-driven. And in our company, you hear people say things like, stay in your own swim lane. The reason the management team or the executive team is willing to give us probably more credit on this than we deserve is these CX champions had never sat in rooms together on a regular basis. So I'm merely facilitating communications. It sounds crazy, but it's very handoffish, right? We're process driven. I did my job. Now it goes to you. You did your job, now it goes to you. So that's why they're willing to give us the pass. And we only meet for an hour once a month. It typically results, not meetings that I'm in, with cross-functional teams getting together on their own because we're proactively identifying potential issues that could cause a bad customer experience. I have done a horrible job in documenting that, to be honest. So, but that would be another way to demonstrate the value we're bringing.
And one of the things I would just add is when you look at this governance team that Liz has talked about bringing together, you know, all of these people at some point were engaged, you know, and to be, you know, really prescriptive, like in the building of the journey map and the identifying of touch points. And it was, to Liz's point, a first time many of them sat together and said, oh, that's what that team does, and that might be how it affects me and my job. So and then a lot of them were also included in the, you know, understanding what was going to be an effective survey program for the company. So I liked what Liz did because the governance team became the team, but they were always included along the way. So I think having a mechanism to make their voice matter, I think was really important. Their voice mattered, they were learning, they were sharing, and now you have them in a point where they actually care about the outcomes, and that is a very different place from where you started, which I think is huge.
And one of the things we did was we included our technology people in this.
Yeah.
Because even though they don't think they're part of the customer experience, how our customers access our technology or how they access our portals or how they, I didn't need to go in and say, these things are not customer friendly. Once they saw the customer feedback, it came from the customer's voice, and now they're able to use that data to build business cases to justify consolidating maybe 10 technology applications down to 2, right? So, and getting the manpower to do that. So this is being used to help drive other things that are going on in the company.
We have a couple more questions. I hope we can have time to get to them. But this next one here, how is the decision process of what will be the focus of CX for the period? And basically, is it changing over time? And they want to know, do you find that from your customer journey, or how do you go about finding that?
Carrie will have a more sophisticated answer. I'll tell you the way that we do it. We overlay the survey results with the moments of truth on the journey map. And quite frankly, we focus on 3 because we just don't have the breadth and depth of folks in the company that don't have 3 other jobs. And we just try to do those 3 very well. I'll know more after this next survey. One of the things, a weird thing that came up was our contracting process was very difficult. That makes no sense when you think about that being time to revenue. We spent a lot of time on that. That was low-hanging fruit, to Carrie's point. We'll see in this next survey if customers saw a difference, right? But we tie it to those moments of truth on the journey map and overlay that with the customer results. And just try to focus, there's some that's just table stakes that, should be what you do anyways, but 3 big ones. And keep our eyes focused on that, and we'll see. I don't know if we'll make progress in 1 year, but we'll see.
And you try to find an ROI on those changes as well?
Yeah, we do, but I need to rely, especially if it's an operational standpoint, I rely on my operations partners to quantify that. On the legal stuff, we have a more difficult time quantifying, but we do try to tie it back to the business case for our more quantifiable.
Okay, great. Let's get to our last question here. And it's kind of a more general one, I would say. Could you describe the day-to-day life of your CX leader, I guess in this case, in practice? What we are starting with the CX in my company, she says, but we don't know what should be the day-to-day activities of this professional.
I think I should hand that off to Carrie because, again, I'll give you my day-to-day life. Keep in mind, I'm not a CX leader, right? We don't have a formal CX program. So I spend 80% of my time talking to investors on Wall Street or talking to employees. So relative to what my role is, it's working through my CX champions to develop a scorecard that reports on the 3 areas that we're focused on to improve our scores, and counseling them if they have questions relative to activities they may employ or not employ to drive results, and then leading those sessions once a month and then reporting back to executives. It's providing some counsel when we go into the CSAT surveys, but I've outsourced the day-to-day operations, if you will, to customers first now because I don't have resources. So the majority of my time is talking to investors or employees or providing consultation that way or sitting in user conferences with our customers. Carrie, what would a real CX leader do?
Well, what I was going to say is, one, you do have a program. You don't have like a dedicated team. I think that is the only other thing I would say is, if I could ask this question, is who's the right person to lead CX in a company? And my answer is always the same thing. It doesn't matter on the role. It matters you find the right leader that can bring people together, that are very results-oriented, and that will have a passion to bring the customer voice in. I mean, so it's the person, not the role. And I think in Liz's company and the environment they're in, there is no one that could have played the role the way you played it, because you have built a program that it really is governance-led, which is really exciting, and you do provide that leadership in your 20%. But, you know, it's more effective than I've seen when there's full-time CX leaders who don't have a program. So, to answer this question, I think that when you look at where do you start with in a CX leadership role, it's exactly what Liz has laid out. It's, you know, really understand the customer experience end to end. Start somewhere, whether you use journey mapping or something to document it. Listen to your customers through some sort of survey mechanism or feedback or user groups or focus groups. There's a lot of ways to do that. Bring that together with the right cross-functional team to then determine what are the actions we're going to focus on, short-term, long-term, and then start connecting that to the financial outcomes of your business. But there, you know, it's different. It's not always the same for every company. And I think the biggest thing is, you know, you have the right structure in place, the right person in place, you know, and it is figuring out, to Liz's point, is the sequence and the pace of your business. And it's not the same for everybody.
Well, and I think that goes to the point that I was trying to make on flexibility.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I would have said, and all these people need to report to me, or the only way this can be effective is if our call centers report into me, that may work for some companies. That wouldn't have worked at CSG, right? So can you still be effective? You can still be effective if you have the right people on the team.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And in terms of day-to-day, it's basically a project or program manager kind of role, right? Getting all these tasks done that lead to the goals that you mentioned.
Yeah.
So that's all the questions that we have. I just want to remind everybody that if you do have any additional questions about the session today, or if you want to speak to one of our CX practitioners about your own company's CX or journey mapping projects, just email me at the email address on the screen. Contact us at customersfirstnow.com. I'll get back to you immediately and we'll schedule something. All of our previous webinar sessions are available on our website at customersfirstnow.com/events. And there's really a lot of very valuable and useful information. We'll be sending out a link to today's recording to everybody in a couple of days once we get that edited. I just want to thank Liz, especially, for coming down and joining us today, and Carrie for their great conversation and giving our audience some really, really insightful information today. That was really an awesome conversation.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Liz.
Thanks, everyone, for joining. Bye.